Hi! Well everyone, it's the long-awaited part 2. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you haven't been here before, my name is Cameron. I make videos about books and book content, and I, earlier this year, read all of the Bridgerton books. So, I decided I wanted to recap all of them. So, there is a part 1 on my page. You can definitely check it out. But this is part 2. I don't really have anything else to say apart from that, other than my lovely sister Ellie decided to help me out with editing this video. So everyone comment down below. Thank you, Ellie. And we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so on to Sir Philip. On to Sir Philip with love. So the books do kind of take on a shift after this. We'll say during Whistledown, DW, and then after Whistledown, AW. We are now in the after Whistledown era. The books take a little bit more of a shift. Like, a lot of these books become a little bit more serious. They handle a bit more tough contents. But I also think a lot of the couples become a lot healthier and better and more communicative. So, there is a noticeable shift if you ever decide to read the books, but Whistledown is no longer a part of it. So, now, we're on to Sir Philip with love. I agree. Which is my least favorite book. Yeah.
Completely honest right now, I hate this book.
I was so mad at what they decided to do with Eloise and who her partner was. So, I know the Bridgerton TV show makes lots of changes. This is my official plea that they should change everything about Eloise's husband. Let's get into that. Let's dissect her husband. Philip Crane, okay? So Philip Crane is a botanist, I believe is his official title. Philip Crane is a botanist. He is married to a woman named Marina and has 2 twins, obviously. He has 2 kids, twins, Amanda and Oliver. Amanda and Oliver are, I want to say 7 at the start of the book. Philip and his wife, Marina, are not particularly close because Marina struggles really, really badly with depression. So the prologue is kind of a introduction to this home and family dynamic. So, Marina, because she's so severely depressed, like bedridden, so depressed, is not a part of her kid's life, and Philip is also not a part of their kid's life. So, that's gonna preset what's going on there. But, yeah. So, the prologue details about how Philip is studying some of his little plants when he sees Marina leave the house and go down to the lake, and he is surprised because he's like, wow, she hasn't been out of the house in a very long time. It might be a good thing for her to be out. But he follows her, and she goes to the lake to attempt to drown herself. Yeah, so starting this book off with an unaliving attempt. Kinda crazy. So, he goes in, swims, saves her, but she does catch fever and die a few days later, okay? How does Eloise come into this? Eloise and Marina are distant cousins. So, after she passes, Philip is like, well, I gotta honor the official mourning time, but I need a new wife so that she can take care of my kids. And around that same time, he gets a letter from Eloise, who we remember Eloise is her whole habit, her thing is writing letters. So she basically just sends a condolence note of, hey, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I will greatly miss Marina since she was a cousin of mine. If you need anything, let me know. And Mr. Philip is like,
I've never heard of this person before.
let me write back. And he essentially writes back this thank you note. Thank you for thinking of me. Here's this pressed flower. Anyway, they continue their correspondence for months. And they're just writing to each other. After a while, Philip is like, hey, you should come visit me so that we can get married. Okay? Because I guess that's how things worked in Regency England. So he's like, you should come visit me at some point, and then maybe we can, like, consider getting married to each other, okay? One thing, first issue with Philip, he never mentions his children. In any of the letters, he doesn't mention a child to her, okay? I feel like that's an important thing to know when you enter a relationship. Maybe you should know if your partner already has children. So he sends that letter. Around the same time, Penelope, who she states, she was like,
I was happy to be a spinster forever if Penelope was doing it with me.
And now that Penelope is no longer a spinster, Eloise is like,
ooh, I should probably think about getting married.
So, during Daphne's ball, she runs out, okay? She gets in a little carriage, goes and visits Philip. Philip lives in the countryside. Several things wrong with this. None of her family knows where she went. She doesn't hear anything about Whistledown. She doesn't notify Philip that she is even coming to visit. Which is important because he needs to get a chaperone for her, so they aren't just the two of them. Oh my gosh. I have the hiccups. So that it isn't just the two of them at this place, okay? So, she essentially just arrives and realizes, oh shoot, I never informed him that I was coming. And so they kind of get to know each other, and he's like, oh, by the way, these are my kids, Amanda and Oliver. And she's like,
you literally never mentioned these kids.
And he was like, yeah, I have. He literally tries to gaslight her and being like, I've mentioned them before. Get over yourself. I hate this guy. But she meets his children, and his children, who are, once again, 7, make it very clear to her that they do not want her here. They are brats because they've never been disciplined, because they've never had a parental figure in their life. So they're like, we don't want you here. And she, as someone with 7 siblings, is like,
okay. That's too bad. Your dad wanted me here, so I'm staying.
So her entire experience with children is just having a bunch of siblings, which is totally valid experience. I'm not trying to invalidate that, but she's very much like, okay, too bad. You know, very, very big sister behavior. So, after they make it very clear to her that they don't want her, she kind of spends the day wandering around the house. And he spends a lot of time in his little greenhouse because, like I said, he's a botanist. And he's kind of work obsessed. But while Philip is working in his greenhouse, he's sitting there and he is like surprised that Eloise is pretty. He's like, oh, she's not married at 28. She must be super ugly. I hate Philip. So when he's on his way back from the greenhouse, he runs into her in the kitchen, and they were like talking about marriage and stuff like that. And she's like,
okay, so marriage. Are you getting married because you want a wife or because you want someone to parent your children?
And he's straight up like, oh, I need my kids need mom. So they've been writing letters to each other for the past several months. Additionally, he never mentioned he had kids. So, of course, Eloise is going to get the impression that, like, he's actually interested in her, and he's not just... If she doesn't know he has kids, she's not going to assume he's just looking for a mother for his children. So, a little icked out by that, too. So, when they're talking about marriage, he's like, why didn't you get married? Like, you're pretty. You should have gotten married. She is like, I didn't think anyone was interesting enough to marry. She's gotten like 9 proposals. She's now like, but now I want to get married. Like, she doesn't give him a reason for like, oh, but now I want to get married. And she's like, why didn't you get married already? And he's like, well, I can't marry someone nearby because everybody knows my children are horrendous. They're little devil children. Huh? Your kids are enough of menaces that everybody in the countryside near you knows that they're menaces? That's insane. That's insane. Are you done? Come here. She's here. I misstated this. So when Philip asks Eloise to be his wife, like while they're sitting there in the kitchen, he says, I want you to be the wife and the mother of my children. And she's like, okay, which one do you want more? And he like literally can't answer that. So I misspoke earlier. My bad. I'm putting you back outside. Prison. Jail. Jail. Anyway. So. The next day, Amanda and Oliver dump flour all over Eloise. Like, the classic, like, open a door slightly and put a bucket of something on there, and once you open the door, the bucket falls on you. Yeah, they totally cover her in flour. She, because she has no experience being a mother and only experience having siblings, she puts a fish in Amanda's bed. Which, like, taste of your own medicine. Amanda is very upset. She goes to Philip and she's like, yo, your kids needs some sort of like structure and discipline, and they desperately need your attention. Which, she's so right about that. Most of the time when kids are bad, it's because they have bad parents. If you personally read this book and you were like, the kids were so annoying, I don't necessarily think the same way, because the kids behaving that way is a direct result of how their parents behaved. But anyway, so Eloise is like, your kids need attention and discipline from you. And he's like, you don't get an opinion until you're their mother. He literally says that to her. Huh? What do you mean? You invited her to your house. You want her to get married to you. You're not gonna take advice from her? Yikes. But after discovering the fish, Amanda is like, it basically demands that Eloise leave. And Philip is like, no, she's my guest. She's welcome to stay as long as she wants. And that the kids pranking her literally won't affect that. Philip and Eloise start spending a little bit more time together. They start getting to know each other. She gets like a tour of the house and then goes and visits the greenhouse. And then when they're in there for the first time, Philip asks to kiss her, and so they do. Okay? The next morning, as Eloise is leaving her room, she's not paying attention, she trips over some string that is like drawn across her door, like hurts herself, like she gets a black eye and she hurts her arm a little bit and stuff like that. Philip says that he will discipline the children, and he's like really, really upset, but Eloise can also kind of tell he like definitely blames himself. As he should. He is a bad father. His kids behaving this way is a direct result of him not being there for his kids. So Philip disciplines the children and essentially like tells them that they need to apologize. Amanda kind of like has this weird respect for Eloise now that she's put a fish in her bed. She's like, all right, she gets it. We're matching. So Amanda willingly is like, hey, really sorry about that. And Oliver is not happy about this. Oliver still doesn't want anything to do with Eloise. As he should, his mother only died months ago. Philip kind of, after that talk, kind of realizes he has no idea how to be a father, and his father disciplined him through hitting, which he knows he absolutely doesn't want to do. You know you don't want to hit your children. Bare minimum. Like, that's the only kind of redeemable part about Philip in the book. We know he doesn't want to hit children. Yippee! So, because Eloise like hurt herself tripping on that twine, he will not let her do anything. Philip won't. And she told him that she was like, I'm really not hurt that bad, and I'd like to spend time with you. But he's totally like, no, you're hurt. Bye. So he doesn't listen to his partners either. I don't know. Because Eloise is pissed at Philip, obviously, as she should be, she eats dinner in her room that night. And she actually actively tries to avoid him the next day by going and hanging out with Amanda and Oliver, who she takes swimming. And while they're hanging out, Amanda is like, hey, I really like you. Like, this 7-year-old is now vibing with Eloise. Oliver still hasn't said anything, but anyway, they're going swimming. When they go swimming, Philip, like, comes in for lunch or whatever, and he's like, where are my kids and my friend? And his staff is like, oh, they went swimming. And Philip gets really mad and, like, races out. And he's like, what the heck? My kids can't swim. As his kids are literally swimming in the lake. So Eloise is like,
yes, they can.
So Philip, who's really mad, sends his kids back up to the house. And he's, like, upset with Eloise, and she's like, hey.
Your kids could obviously swim. How did you not know your kids could swim?
And then he feels really guilty and embarrassed because he's like, I didn't know they could swim. So we went from the bare minimum of you don't want to hit your kids to below the bare minimum of not knowing if your children can swim or not, especially after your former wife tried to drown herself. So when they're down by the lake talking, he kisses Eloise again. And he's like, I need you. Like, he's like, ooh, I'm lusting after you. And then immediately after is like, go back up to the house and change. While she's soaking wet. Because she just got out of swimming in the lake. Later that night, they have dinner, and he, like, apologizes to Eloise. Because he's like, I'm sorry I yelled at you. Because I didn't know if my kids could swim or not. So while they're eating, the Bridgerton brothers show up. All of them. Anthony, Benedict, Colin, and Gregory, who we really haven't seen in a book for like 4 books. All 4 of them show up and start beating up Philip, as he deserves. Anthony leaves the other brothers with Philip while they're beating him up, and Anthony goes and he's like, so you're already staying at this man's house. You're gonna have to get married to him. And she's like, okay. But in the meantime, like, while they were waiting for the proposal and for the license and to go get married at a church, she was gonna go stay at Benedict's, which was right nearby. And that Philip could come visit her if he wanted to see her. So Philip, after he gets like beat up with them, like offers them dinner, and then they become friends, which feels really unrealistic because he's horrendous to Eloise. But you know, the next day, Philip is like, okay, so we have to get married, which Eloise is like, yeah, I already know that, because he feels like they're a good pair. And she's like,
What do you mean we're a good pair?
and then they take the opportunity to hanky-panky each other. Because the only thing you need to be a good pair is to have a compatible hanky-panky. I hate this guy. When Eloise is at Benedict's, the Bridgerton boys are all like hanging out there, and so they're like, Philip, we should go shooting. So they're all out back shooting, and Eloise shows up, and all the boys are like, no. And Eloise kicks their butts because she's a better shot than everyone. And then Anthony jokes that he will double Eloise's dowry if Philip goes out and shoots with her. It's a joke, I think. It's not confirmed if he's actually serious or not, but I'm like pretty sure it's a joke. Anyway, later Philip invites Anthony, Benedict, Sophie, and Eloise over for dinner to meet his children, and they do. So they like stand there and like, hey, this is my kid, Amanda and Oliver, like here they are, and they were talking, and then Philip was like, okay, you're done now, bye, and like sent them away. And the kids were really upset that they had to be sent away. And like, I think the rest of the Bridgertons are also like, what the heck is this guy doing? Because obviously they're a really close-knit family. They're the ones who are like, yes, everybody gets to come to dinner, yippee. So, after dinner, Eloise and Philip are talking, or maybe a few days later. I didn't write it down. A few days later, Philip and Eloise are talking to each other, and she is like, the reason I didn't get married to anyone is because I didn't love anyone, so it's really important to me that love isn't a marriage. And Philip is like, well, I mean, I never felt love or passion in my last marriage to Marina, but I feel passionate for you. And then during this conversation, he's like, so can you explain to me why you ran away from London? Because by this point, the Bridgerton boys have been like, yeah, she ran away and didn't tell us anything. He's like, why did she run away from London? And so she tells him like, oh, my best friend got married and I knew I was going to have to be a spinster alone and I didn't want that, so blah, 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 blah. So, they go on and get married, yippee! And they do more hanky-panky, and she sees the scars on his back from when his father like beat him with the switch when he was younger. So, another man with daddy issues. Are we surprised? No. Yeah, so, as their marriage goes on, the marriage is going on for a few weeks. The only time that Eloise like really sees him is when they're like doing the thing, you know? And otherwise she's like, you don't talk to me outside of that. Yikes. When Eloise goes and checks on the kids, the nurse who has been taking care of them, she sees them like hitting the kids' hands with a switch. With a ruler. And she doesn't love that. So she goes to try and talk to Philip about it, and Philip just tries to like make out with her instead of listening to what she has to say. He just like tries to make a move on her, and she's like, I'm trying to talk to you about something serious. And he's just like, no. Yikes. So, Eloise is like, I need a break from this guy. She goes to visit Benedict and Sophie again. She goes over to their house. She tells him that she's going there, but yeah. And then Philip decides maybe he should take his wife seriously and goes and like checks on the kids in the nursery, where he finds the nurse beating them with a book. And so he, in the one good dad move of this entire book, immediately fires her, and he's like, never lay hands on my children again, get out. Yeah, and that's like the first moment of bonding we see with him and his kids, where he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. And they're like, Daddy, we love you. And it's like, okay. When Eloise gets to Benedict and Sophie's house, they find out that Charles, her nephew, I think their eldest kid, has like a really severe fever. So she stays with them to help take care of Charles and to allow Sophie and Benedict to get some sleep, as a good aunt does, you know? So Philip is like, she didn't come home last night. So he runs to go find her. And he gets there and he's like mad at her for staying somewhere overnight. And then he finds out that Charles has a fever. And he's like, ooh, my bad. But he recommends this like tea, this specific tea with this specific herb to help bring down his fever, okay? The next day, Charles's fever goes down. They don't know if it's because of the tea or not, but Eloise is like,
I know it's because of the tea.
she's trying to be a supportive spouse, okay? So they ride home, and Philip is like, hey, I fired the nurse, and tells her, like, the whole story. And while they're talking, like, Eloise is really upset also because of the whole situation. Like, it's an upsetting situation, and she is like, I love those kids. Because she's actually had quite a bit of, like, development that I didn't necessarily talk about, like, just spending time with the kids. So, I believe her, she likes the kids more than the kids like Philip, but, you know. But yeah, she talks about, like, I love my kids. And he's like, oh, I'm in love with her now. Yippee! A few nights later, I guess, Philip is spending, like, a whole day alone, and Eloise is like, okay, it's been a whole day. That night, she goes and finds him, and he's looking at a painted portrait of Marina and him. Philip, like, starts talking about Marina and her, like, depression. Obviously, they don't use that word. I think they use melancholy, because depression wasn't a real thing. No, it was. Depression was a thing, but it wasn't, like, a diagnosable thing. But he was, like, talking about her. And then, in the weirdest change of pace ever, he, like, turns to Eloise and he's like, my marriage was so horrible with her that you can't complain about this marriage. Like, he tells Eloise she can't complain about their marriage because it's significantly better than anything he ever had with Marina. What? No correlation. What are you talking about? A mug is not the same thing as a plate. They go on to have 3 more kids and live happily ever after. I hate this book. This might be one of the few books I didn't DNF, despite the fact that I
Hated.
one of the main protagonists. I had a miserable time reading this book. I, like, rushed through it because I was having such a terrible time. Philip is horribly... It's so disappointing because Eloise was very much being built as, like, in the 4 books prior, she was built as this character that was, like, she stands up for herself. She has very strong beliefs. She talks about how she believes women should be educated and, like, a bunch of stuff like that. And then for it to only lead to this book, where by the end she really has no personality of her own. It like, breaks my heart. I don't know what happened to Julia Quinn in this one, because the next 3 are really good. Like, I don't know why it happened that the 5th book is just a terrible time, but yeah. So, the book. I don't know if you can see that. Last place, last place, last place. I hated that book. That being said, though, they aren't the worst couple, because I still think Daphne and Simon have significantly worse communication problems, but I don't love that Eloise just sits down and takes it, you know? So, like, no part of that screams equal partnership to me, personally. So, anyway, that is To Sir Philip with Love. Now we get on to the best couple of the series, and this is Francesca's story, When He Was Wicked. So, this is When He Was Wicked. This is Francesca's story. It kind of has 2 parts. The first part takes place in 1820, and the second part takes place in 1824, okay? Bonk. Michael Sterling falls in love with Francesca the very, very first time he sees her. The problem, the very first time he sees Francesca, is at her and John's engagement party, because John is his cousin. Basically, the prologue goes on to explain that Michael is a bit of a rake. He's known as the Merry Rake because he is a super likable guy. He's a rake for sure, but, like, everybody really likes him. Basically, the entire first part is about how Michael very much is in love with Francesca. John is the Earl of Kilmartin, okay? They're Scottish. We love Scottish men. So, Francesca and John, by 1820, have been together for 2.5 years. 2 years. What we also know about Michael is that John's family took him in when he was very, very young, and they raised him together. So they're basically brothers. So if I accidentally call Michael John's brother, it was an accident. They were raised as brothers, but they're actually cousins. At the start of the story in 1820, Francesca considers Michael one of her best friends. So, late in the evening, when she and John and Michael are hanging out, because Michael's like constantly third wheeling with them. When they are hanging out together, Francesca is like, hey, I want to go out for a walk. Do you guys want to come with me? John is like, my head hurts. I'm going to go lay down. So Michael goes out on a walk with her, okay? And they're buddies. So they're just hanging there bantering. She has this running bit where she's like, tell me about a time you were wicked. So when he was wicked. And wicked is just like how he's flirting with women or he's going out to drink or whatever. She thinks it's a fun thing. Like they're buddies still. Anyway, they go on this walk. They're hanging out together. And when they return, they find out that John has passed away in his bed. I believe Julia Quinn said that he had a hemorrhage. Obviously, medicine is not advanced enough in the story for us to know that. But Julia Quinn, I believe, says he had a brain hemorrhage. And then, immediately after, Francesca comes to Michael and is like, I'm pregnant. She's like very, very early along, okay? So there's this weird amount of time where it's like, who's going to become the next Earl? Is it going to be Francesca and John's child, or is it going to be Michael? 6 weeks later, as Francesca is mourning the loss of her husband, she miscarries the baby. And I don't laugh at that in the sense of like, that's a funny thing to happen. It's actually really tragic. It's significantly darker than a lot of the Bridgerton books. And like, when I was reading it, I was legitimately shocked. Not only does she lose her husband, but 6 weeks later, she loses their baby. And so she calls for Michael in this really, really terrible time, and Michael is so heartbroken about the whole thing. Like, it doesn't even involve him being in love with Francesca. It's literally like he just lost his cousin / brother, essentially. And now he's gotta lose what he thinks is going to be the final piece of him on Earth. So he doesn't come. So a few weeks later, after she's kind of physically healed from this, she comes to see Michael and confronts him. Like, she is like, you have been avoiding me. It's really hurt my feelings. I've really needed you. We're the only two people who know what's going on with each other. And he is very much like, I do not know what to do. I don't know what to do. And so she's like, well, I think we need to like hold on to each other. Like, even though I'm not married to your brother anymore, like, I still want to be friends with you. You're my best friend. They kind of like sit and cry on each other's shoulder. And then Francesca just kind of like, if I had the baby, I would have married you next. Just between keeping the title in the family, and she essentially is like, you knew him so well that you'd be a great replacement for him as a father. Which you can see where she's coming from, but Michael, of course, gets really upset about this because he's like, no one could replace John. I certainly couldn't replace John. So Michael, of course, gets upset about this. Like, it's an interesting one because you can totally see where Francesca is coming from, and you can also see where, like, Michael is coming from about John. When he gets upset with her, Francesca is like, because he doesn't react violently or anything, he just gets very upset about it. And Francesca's like, okay, I think we need a break from seeing each other. I think we should just not see each other for a while. And so she leaves. And in that same afternoon, Michael is like, you know what? I'm gonna go travel to India. So, 4 years later, Francesca is actually really enjoying her life as a widow. She, like I previously mentioned, widows in the Regency area have a ton more freedom. She essentially is acting as Earl and also just gets a lot of freedom to do whatever she wants. She can go hang out with lots of people. She can go do a bunch of stuff. Obviously, she's still mourning her husband. She even says in this portion that she would probably never get remarried again unless she wanted a child, and she really, really wants a child. She kind of states her intention that she wants to re-enter the marriage mart so that she can find a husband and eventually have children. Around the same time, Michael returns from India. And so when they're out and about, they run into each other. He doesn't know where she's living, so he's like, I'm gonna go to the Kilmartin home in London. And surprise, surprise, she's living there. So they kind of run into each other. Several days later, she is like, it's totally cool, like, you can stay here, I'm gonna go live with my mom for the time period. He's like, okay. So he goes to visit her at the Bridgerton house, and he goes and sees Violet there. Bonk. And they have a good flirt with each other. Michael is known as a rake. He's just very flirty with everyone. He is just like flattering her, and he's like, oh, you don't look a day over 20. If you didn't have kids who were 20, I wouldn't believe that. Like, a bunch of like stuff you say to older women to flatter them. And in my notes, I literally said, hell yeah, brother. Good for you for flirting with Violet. And while he's like sitting there flirting with Violet, Francesca walks in and she's like, stop flirting with my mom. But it's all like a joke. Francesca and Michael go on a walk together. And while they're walking, they're kind of discussing, hey, what are the plans for the future? Francesca's like, are you planning on getting married, the merry rake? And she also tells him that she's planning on getting remarried because she really, really wants kids. She also tells him that he should get married because he is one of the most eligible bachelors, and the ton will be completely after him. The next chapter, Violet and Francesca are talking, and Francesca, obviously, she and her mom have like the shared experience of both being widows. So Francesca is like, hey, why did you never decide to get married? And Violet was kind of like, honestly, I never found someone I thought was well suited enough. And also, I was raising 8 children. I was kind of busy. I just kind of forgot about it. Francesca says that she wants a baby, and Violet tells her that she will support her no matter what. Violet is a good mom. She all the time is like, I want you guys to be happy to her kids. She doesn't care who they marry. She doesn't care what decisions they make as long as they're happy. I love her. So, Michael is really, really struggling with the idea that he is now the Earl. It makes him feel like he's being forced to be the new John. Like, he feels like no one really remembers John, and he's like stuck in a situation where he has to be John now. So he's like throwing a fit about this, but it actually turns out he's just spiking a fever because he has malaria. So he's kind of getting a little delusional. Because he spikes a fever, he is kind of bedridden. So Francesca comes over, bonk, to check on him after he doesn't show up for dinner. Because the Bridgertons invite him over for dinner because he's also in town, and they're like, you're family, so come eat dinner with us. So he doesn't show up for dinner. So Francesca goes to check on him and finds out he has like a fever, and he tells her, oh, I have malaria. And she's like, oh my gosh, are you dying? And he's like, no, I just need to wait out this fever. So she stays with him to take care of him because he's like, you can't catch it from me. After Violet spends like the night taking care of him, she returns back to the Bridgerton house, and Violet is like, why do you keep going back to that house? Are you having an affair with Michael? And Francesca's like, absolutely not. Ick. He's one of my best friends. But after she says that, she's like, oh, I might have feelings for Michael. Oops. We come back around to the Bridgerton birthday ball, Violet's birthday ball, which we heard a lot about Penelope and Colin there. This is that birthday ball. At the birthday ball, you have Sophie, Kate, Eloise, and Francesca all kind of like talk about Michael. Because like Sophie and Kate are both like, he's kind of a hottie, and he like, you guys are already buddies, why don't you get married to him? And Francesca really doesn't have an answer other than like there's a lot of complications to it. She's obviously still mourning her former husband, and she also feels conflicted about marrying her former husband's brother / cousin. So like, she just doesn't really have an answer to tell them other than it's kind of complicated. That was a good scene because I also liked Sophie and Kate and Eloise and her just like talking about how hot Michael is. Certified seal of approval. At the ball, Michael and Francesca are just like hanging out together. Once again start discussing marriage, and she's like, I really think you should get married, and he's like, I really don't want to, and they get into a fight at this ball. And the next day, because at this ball she has declared her intention that like she is back on the marriage mart. The next day she gets sent like tons of flower bouquets just from a bunch of different suitors. And Michael comes over and like apologizes to her because he's like, I'm sorry I behaved that way. And this is also kind of the point where she gets so many things from other suitors where he's like, hey, I want her. And not like in actually a possessive way. He's just like, these guys are all adults. I'm the best. But because he's like upset about all of these flower arrangements, he goes out to drink at the club. When he's out drinking at the club, there are some other like society men that are there that are talking about Francesca and what has happened to her and how they all essentially want to marry her and ravish her and stuff like that. And basically they like insult her honor. And so he beats them up. Like, Michael takes on like 3 men and just beats the crap out of them. And then Colin apparently belongs to the same club. Colin stops by to drink, and he is like talking to Michael because everybody knows Michael. The Bridgerton family is all a big fan of Michael. And he's like, dude, why don't you just marry Francesca? Like, you're clearly upset about all of these people pursuing her. Why don't you just do it? Michael doesn't have an answer. So everybody's kind of like, clearly Francesca and Michael belong together. It's the easiest choice. They really like each other. Like, it would clearly go well. But neither of them, like, they have conflicted feelings. And for good reason, because not literally, but like mentally John is still kind of between them. Like, Michael doesn't want to disrespect John, and Francesca also doesn't want to disrespect John. They go to another ball, as they do. So many balls. Michael is like keeping an eye on Francesca because he knows a lot of men are pursuing her now. And she disappears. So he's like, somebody's got to be out with her in the garden. So he goes out to the garden. He finds Sir Geoffrey Fowler kind of like forcibly kissing Francesca. He goes and just beats the crap out of Sir Geoffrey. Like, you can see it on his face. So essentially, like, if someone asks what happened to Sir Geoffrey, he's gonna have to be like, oh, I tried to kiss a woman without her consent and someone beat the crap out of me for that. So Francesca, after that, is like, I gotta go home. Like, I can't be out and about. Like, someone just tried to force themselves upon me. I'm going home. Which, valid. Francesca kind of picks up on the fact that Michael is upset with her. So she waits for him when she gets home and, like, catches him, and she's like, why are you mad at me? And he's like, I'm not mad at you. And so they argue about it. And then he, out of the blue to her, but not out of the blue to us as readers, kisses her because he's obviously in love with her. So she kisses him back, like she's very clearly into it and into him, but then she feels like she's really betraying herself and betraying John and like a bunch of stuff like that. So she kind of cuts it off and then is like, I'm headed back to Scotland, which is where the Kilmartin family home is. And Michael goes back to the club where he runs into Colin again, and Colin's like, hey, I just proposed to Penelope, yippee! And Colin is like, okay, once again, why can't you get married to Francesca? And Michael's like, she might say no. And Colin's like, okay, I mean, I just proposed to someone and it worked for me, so Michael is like, aha, a reason for me to go to Scotland to pursue Francesca. And he goes to Scotland, and he's like, hey, Colin and Penelope are engaged. And she's like, yippee, we love Penelope. And then he's like, let's get married. In his proposal, though, it's not like I am deeply in love with you, and I've felt this way for many times, and I know, like, I'm sure you have complicated feelings about it, because I do too. Like, it should have been phrased that way, but the way he frames it is like, hey, you can keep your title. It'll just be more convenient for you. Like, you don't have to move anywhere. Like, you can keep your title. It's just super convenient. Like, that's how he phrases it, which, Michael. But he's like, it'll be super convenient for you. Also, mwah, and like kisses her, and then they hanky-panky. The next day, she is like super upset with herself because she actually really, really enjoyed being with Michael a little more than she enjoyed being with John. Because, to be honest, Francesca and John were not a love match. They really, really liked each other, but she was like, we were mostly companions. We weren't like, there wasn't like a huge amount of passion, and I didn't feel like the utmost love in the world for him, but he was one of my best friends. So she goes out on a walk, and then on her walk, it starts raining. So she kind of gets stranded out in the middle of nowhere. So Michael comes to like find her, and he's like, what are you doing, you dope? And so they ride back a little bit of the way, and they're like, okay, it's raining way too hard, we're gonna get hypothermia. They stop at the garden house, and while they're all soaking wet and stuff like that, he's like, hey, so you know how I proposed marriage? What do you think about that? Like, you never answered my question. And she was like, if you get me pregnant, then I'll have an answer. So she's essentially like, something else can decide this for me. And so they hanky-panky again, which, I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of reading scenes like that, but this one in this book in like the gardener's house is the best one of the series. Sorry. So she still doesn't answer him, long story short. So Michael starts like actively courting her. So he starts bringing her gifts and flowers because he's like, I'm gonna do this the right way. He's like, I shouldn't approach this as a marriage of convenience, especially because I'm in love with her. Several months later, she still won't answer him. She's still got extremely complicated feelings about this. So he eventually kind of loses his patience and he's like, I have been in love with you the entire time. He very clearly is like, you can't lead me on like this. And in the meantime, you should probably find another place to live. So she leaves for like literally a few minutes and then she's like, actually, I'm actually in love with him. So I don't want to leave because I love him. So she runs back in and she's like, I accept your proposal because I'm also in love with you. They receive the news that Colin and Penelope got married. She's like, well, no reason for us to wait, and they just go and get married. So several weeks later, Michael spikes a fever. And with malaria, the more frequently the fevers happen, the more likely for it to maybe be fatal. So Francesca is like really, really worried that he is going to die. And that's kind of the moment where she's like, oh, I don't want him to die because I'm in love with him. Yay! And the next morning, he still has a fever, because most of the time malaria fevers are only like 24-hour situations. The next morning, he still has a fever, so that's kind of when they're like, it's a different fever, you're not going to die. One of the last chapters, Francesca goes to John's grave, and she is like telling him like, I mean no disrespect to you, but I am in love with Michael. I've already married him. I hope you're looking down at us and you're very happy for us. Michael overhears that like she's in love with him and then they like declare their love for each other and it's very sweet. They are the best romance. Their epilogue is also very sweet because Francesca still struggles with infertility. So a lot of the epilogue is discussing like she really, really wants kids, but she's also very, very happy with Michael. And so she struggles with infertility for several years, but then they end up having two little babies. It's so sweet. Can you tell this was one of my favorite books? But yeah, so that is Michael and Francesca. I love them together. I think they are so great. I think he is the best love interest, period. For my couples rating, I think they were also just a breath of fresh air because they didn't have to follow the same patterns that the rest of the family did. Like, it wasn't as scandalous for her to be spending time with Michael alone because she was a widow, you know? In terms of books, so this one is significantly more laid back than Romancing and The Viscount, but it is still definitely a top 3. So, it is going to go in the 3rd spot. I had a wonderful time reading this book, so it doesn't stand alone by itself very well though, but this is not one you want to skip. I think I might tune into the TV show when they adapt that one. That is When He Was Wicked. I heart Michael Sterling. I heart Francesca. Next we have Hyacinth's book, which is It's in His Kiss. Let's get into It's in His Kiss, which is Hyacinth's story and the 7th book of the series. So she's the 8th kid, but it's the 7th book. Let's talk about the love interest of this book. The love interest is Gareth St. Clair. He is the grandson. His mom was the daughter of Lady Danbury. Ay. The book primarily takes place in 1825, but the prologue happens 10 years earlier, 1815. In 1815, Gareth is promised to a young, mentally disabled girl in marriage by his father, the Baron, because the Baron has a bunch of debts that he needs to pay off, and nobody else wants to marry the girl he's promised Gareth to, so he's hoping he can make some money off of it. Gareth is like, no, she's mentally a child. I'm not gonna force her into a marriage she doesn't want. But his father's like, you're gonna do it, or I'm gonna disown you. And he's like, okay, fine. And so the Baron's response is like, whatever, I didn't care about you anyway, you're a bastard. Your mom had intimate relations with someone else, you're not my kid. And Gareth is like, oh, and he's like, anyway, you're disowned. So Gareth is like, fine, and leaves. 10 years later, Hyacinth and Lady Danbury are at the Smythe-Smith musicale. I'm pretty sure I already explained what it is in part 1, but Smythe-Smith is a family. The musicale is like a notoriously ridiculed event. But Lady Danbury makes it a point to go to this event every single year. And Hyacinth is there with her because Hyacinth goes over to her house every Tuesday and they read together because Lady Danbury is very old and Hyacinth needs something to do, I guess. Yeah, they're hanging out and then Gareth shows up because, as we previously mentioned, he's Lady Danbury's grandson. They kind of spend the evening together at the Smythe-Smith musicale. Something we also learn in this is that Gareth's only brother, George, who is the son of the Baron, died very suddenly last year. So now Gareth is kind of like the heir to the title of Baron, okay? At the Smythe-Smith musicale, these two, Gareth and Hyacinth, kind of have a little flirt with each other, which is super fun. And he is very noticeably, he's like, this girl's really smart, and I like that she's very outspoken. The next day, his sister-in-law, George's wife, Caroline, comes to visit Gareth because she's like, hey, I was looking through some of George's old stuff and I found this journal written by your grandmother, or who she thinks is his grandmother because it's the Baron's mother, Isabella. She's like, I found this journal. It was gifted to George, like he inherited it after your mother died, but it's all in Italian, so you're gonna have to find someone to translate. And so Gareth is like, cool. So he goes over to Lady Danbury's house and he's like, hey, do you know anyone who can translate Italian? It's a reading day. So Hyacinth and Lady Danbury are sitting there and they're like talking about the book they're reading, and Lady Danbury is like, we should write a book together. So a random aside that those two have. But Gareth is like, do you know anyone who can translate Italian? And of course, Hyacinth is like, I actually had an Italian nanny once. I can read Italian. It'll just take me a while because I haven't done it recently. Like, I have to take some time to translate it. But Gareth is like, excellent, we can definitely do that. They agree to meet up with each other the next day. Hyacinth returns back to her house, back to see her mom Violet, and Violet is like, hey, you're one of my last kids to get married, you know who would be good with you? Gareth. And Hyacinth is like, I'm not trying to like avoid marriage, Mom. I'm just waiting for the right person. And Violet is like, you know, I love that about you. She says, I love that you love to speak your mind. What you don't do well is you don't like when people handle that well. Like, you don't know how to handle people who can either stand up to you or are just like cool with you speaking your mind. So you definitely need to work on that. At another event, because they're high society and all they do is go to events, they go to a poetry recitation and they're hanging out with each other. They spend the entire evening together. And he's like, hey, did you translate that first journal entry? And Hyacinth is like, I did. It's all about how little your grandmother wanted to marry your grandfather. In the meantime, in the background, as Violet has already mentioned, she thinks Gareth is a good, like, pairing for Hyacinth. And of course, Lady Danbury, who is just trying to marry her favorite grandson off, is like, absolutely. So they're plotting, they're trying to get the two of them together. So Violet's like, Gareth, you should come to a Bridgerton ball, because they have a ball every book. At the ball, they're both kind of keeping an eye on each other all night. Gareth is like, very much noticing how pretty Hyacinth is, and Felicity, we remember Felicity, Penelope's little sister, who is Hyacinth's best friend. Felicity is like dogging on Hyacinth. She's like, ooh, you have a little crush. You don't get crushes. Ooh. In the night, Hyacinth is like, Gareth, let's dance together. Because she's a progressive woman. So, Gareth has a really lovely evening, and as he's heading out, who does he run into? But the Baron. Dun dun dun. We hate the Baron. And the Baron is like, hey, I saw you with Hyacinth, Bridgerton, the entire night. You're not good enough for her. You're actually a big loser. And don't forget, you're a bastard. And he also goes on to be like, Hyacinth's never going to want to marry you or want you that way, so stop. As with many of the men in this series, Gareth is really mad because if you bring up his father to him or approach him with his father, he gets really mad. So, in a rage, he runs into Hyacinth and then is like, I'm going to get revenge on my dad, and kisses her. And she's like, okay, and like, is so surprised she like runs away. Gareth, the next day, is like,
oh man, I made a mistake. She's probably really mad at me, but I really need that journal.
So he goes to see her, and he's like, I'm sincerely very sorry for doing that. I'll leave you alone, just give me back the journal. And Hyacinth is like, I wasn't that bothered by it, dude. Like, it's okay. Also, I found out that when your grandmother, Isabella, came here from Italy, she brought a bunch of family jewels. And she says it's in this cabinet in the St. Clair house. And we should probably go get those before your dad finds them and then uses them to pay off all of his debts. He's like, actually, that's a really good idea, but I'm not allowed in my dad's house. And Hyacinth is like,
We'll break in then.
so they quite literally do a heist, and they go find the specific cabinet she's talking about, and they find the hidden compartment where the jewels are supposed to be, but a note falls out instead. Gregory is kind of like teasing Hyacinth about Gareth. He's like, ooh, you don't have crushes on people, that's kind of fun. Hyacinth is like, actually, yeah, I'm like in the process of deciding if I want to marry him or not, which is fun. Gareth comes to see Hyacinth like the next day to kind of like see what the note had on it, and Hyacinth is in the middle of tea with her mom and Gregory and Daphne, the return of Daphne. He gets to meet all of them, and then Hyacinth is like, let's go on a walk. So Gareth and Hyacinth go on a walk. Who do they run into on that walk but the Baron? Dun dun dun. So they run into the Baron, and Hyacinth is immediately like, this guy gives off rancid vibes. All my homies hate Baron St. Clair. The Baron and Gareth kind of exchange words, kind of touching back on what he said at the ball, where he was like, you're not good enough for Hyacinth, she's never gonna want you. They allude to it, but they don't explicitly say it in front of Hyacinth. So Hyacinth is like, what were you guys referencing? And Gareth is like, don't worry about it. Hyacinth, in attempts to make Gareth feel better, because his father was being pretty brutal to him, is like, well, I'm really bad too, I have all of these flaws, here are these flaws, and is like, just talking about them and trying to like make him feel better. And she's also like, I'm really sorry for your dad, like no one should behave that way to their child. And she's yapping. And you know what? If there's anything I respect, it's a yapper. She's yapping, and Gareth is like, you know what? Just be quiet, and kisses her again. While they're kissing, he's like, oh yeah.
I'm gonna marry this girl.
He goes to visit who? But Anthony, the head of the household. So he approaches Anthony and he's like, hey, I'd like to marry Hyacinth. And Anthony is like, yes, finally someone wants to marry Hyacinth. Whoopee, you have my permission. But also, I'm not gonna tell her about this. Like, you need to go do the actual proposing to her. Very progressive of him. It's Tuesday again. Hyacinth is reading to Lady Danbury. And then who shows up? Gareth. Gareth is here and he's like, Hyacinth, let's get married. And Hyacinth is like, yeah, I think you're super cute. Let's get married. Gareth decides that the best way to ensure that Hyacinth is actually going to marry him is to hanky-panky with her. They hanky-panky immediately after they make their second run to the St. Clair Manor to find the jewels, okay? That first note was a clue. They follow the first note, like follow the second clue, get to the second location, find a second note with a second clue. When they're headed back, Gareth runs into his father. And Hyacinth is like hiding nearby, so thankfully he doesn't get busted like walking with Hyacinth, okay? While they run into each other, the Baron, dun dun dun, is like, you never do anything without me saying something about it. So he says Gareth decided to only propose to Hyacinth because the Baron made a comment about it. And the Baron's like, you just wanted to prove me wrong. And so, because Hyacinth's hiding nearby, she hears this. In that conversation, the Baron is also like, also, you're still engaged to, her name is Mary, the girl who from 10 years before. Upon both of those kind of truth bombs, Hyacinth runs away, like while she's hiding. So when the Baron moves on, Gareth goes to look for Hyacinth and she's just like gone. That night, he climbs into her window and she's like, okay, so why did you actually like propose to me? Was it for the reason your dad like said? And he's like, like he can't give her an answer. She's like, okay, so it's definitely because you wanted to prove your dad wrong. And also, I don't want to see you for a while. And then she's also like, also, I regret doing the hanky-panky with you because clearly you had other intentions. So, several days later, Hyacinth is having tea with Violet. She's like, you're acting really weird, and also Gareth hasn't come by. Did you guys break up? Are you good? Like, have you had your first lover's quarrel? And Hyacinth was like, yeah, we had our first fight. Violet, being a good mom and a good advice giver, is like, why don't you just invite Gareth over and like just talk about it? And so Hyacinth's like, yeah, okay. Hyacinth actually goes to visit Gareth and they talk about the journal and the new note that they found. And the new note they found was in Slovene, like totally different language. They talk about that for a while, and then he's like, sorry, I actually really like you. Like, I am actually genuinely excited to marry you. She forgives him. He also, at this time, is like, by the way, the guy you've been saying is my dad, the Baron, is not actually my dad. I'm a bastard. I don't know who my real dad is. And she's just like, okay, that does not bother me. And then she's also like, I still really want to get those jewels. Like, we can't solve this next clue, but I'd really like to get those jewels so your dad doesn't get them. And he's kind of like, I think I'm over that now. But Hyacinth is like, no, I want them now. Like, I want to find them for you. So she goes over to read it, and they're reading their romance book that they really kind of hate. That Lady D was like, we should just write our own because that would be better than this. While they're reading this, Lady D's like, I'm tired of this book. You should read Isabella's journal to me. And Hyacinth's like, okay. When they're doing that, Hyacinth is reading, and then she's like, oh my gosh, Isabella knows who Gareth's real father is. While she's reading this, Lady D fell asleep, because Lady D is ancient, okay? And so Lady D wakes up from her nap and is like, oh, sorry, I fell asleep. Can you go back to reading what you were reading? And Hyacinth is like,
No, actually, I have to go tell Gareth something.
and as she's headed out the door, Lady D is like, hey, I also want you to know how excited I am to have you as a granddaughter. Which is so sweet. I love you, Lady D. Hyacinth figures out, through reading the journal, that Gareth's real father is actually, family scandal, is actually the Baron's brother, who died when Gareth was really, really young. She goes and tells him this, and she's like, I found out who your father is, yippee. And he, as a response, is like, I'm in love with you. She is like, oh, I'm in love with you too. Like, a very quick response. Like, I'm in love with you too. Yippee. She's like, we have to go find these jewels. We have to go find them. They go to the house, to the St. Clair house, and they don't find anything, once again. Not surprising. On their way out, they run into the Baron, which could be dangerous, but Gareth is like, oh, by the way, I know who my real dad is. It's your brother. Get wrecked. He finally kind of gets that revenge on his dad, so he, like, proposes to Hyacinth again for, like, the right reason this time, and she, of course, says yes. They go on to have two kiddos, George and Isabella, which is so cute. And Isabella, many years later, actually finds the jewels in a servant's washroom. But she hides them again for her mother to find later. Aww. I love this book. I think it's so good. And I had a lot of fun actually reading this one. Couple-wise, Hyacinth and Gareth are genuinely my second favorite couple. They follow right behind Francesca and Michael, okay? In terms of the book, unfortunately, the book, like in terms of its plots, isn't the most interesting in my opinion. So, unfortunately, just because of the nature of the way things are, I don't think this is necessarily one of the best plots of the entire series. It is fine. It's very in the middle of the pack, even though it's got one of the best couples. I decided to put It's in His Kiss at number 5. It's super funny to me because the drop-off in quality between It's in His Kiss and An Offer from a Gentleman is drastic. I love this book. I think it's great. These 5 are all actually really fun books. You can guess what's gonna go here. There's one available spot in both of these areas, so you could just assume. But all 5 of these are just great. And then once you get to like Offer from a Gentleman and Duke and I and to Sir Phillip, majorly drastic drop off in quality. So that's what you need to know about It's in His Kiss. And now we have one of the more chaotic stories, which is On the Way to the Wedding. Okay, final book. Finally, the last remaining sibling is Gregory. Gregory is the 7th sibling, youngest brother, last to get married because this is the 8th book, okay? The prologue details Gregory running into a church in the middle of a wedding and him interrupting said wedding. He also, in this prologue, he interrupts the wedding and declares his love for the bride in front of hundreds of people. That is the prologue. That is what we get. I think it's the only prologue that occurs within the events of the book. What a way to start a book, honestly. So, 2 months earlier, Gregory, bonk, tells, oh, you can't see that at all. Okay, take my word for it. The year, 1827. So, 2 months earlier, Gregory is like, alright, I think it's finally time for me to marry. To Anthony. Of course. Head of the family, Anthony. So, Anthony is like, me and Kate are hosting a ball. You can tell Julia Quinn just loves writing Kate and Anthony because they appear so often. You can meet some eligible young ladies there. So he goes and he sees the one. The one being Hermione Watson. Julia Quinn Was that intentional? Anyway, so the one being Hermione Watson. Hermione Watson is best friends with Lucy. Full name Lucinda, but she goes by Lucy. And Lucy kind of is like the ugly best friend. She's not actually ugly. She's very pretty, but just because she's in comparison to Hermione, she's worse by comparison. Hermione is basically like the catch of the season. Gregory at this ball comes over to Hermione and is like, "Hey, do you want to dance?" And Hermione is like, "I can't dance, but you can dance with Lucy." Because Hermione has so many suitors, she's just kind of like, I'm kind of tired of them, you know? Gregory is totally, like, whipped. Like, he is like, I'll do anything for Hermione, even though he said one sentence to her. Gregory takes Lucy out to dance. And Lucy is like, "Hey, in the kindest way, there's kind of no reason for you to try. She's in love with someone else." And he's like, "That's a huge bummer." The man that Hermione is in love with, Mr. Edmonds, sends her a letter, and so Hermione leaves in the middle of the ball to go read that letter and respond to it. So Lucy is like, "Hey, my girl, Hermione, you can't marry Mr. Edmonds. He's a secretary. He's not on your level." Because I want to say Hermione is a viscountess. She's not a viscountess, but she's like the daughter of a viscountess. I don't know that for sure. But anyway, Mr. Edmonds is not on her level. Hermione's like, "Man, that sucks. Like, I want to marry him, but I have to participate in the stupid marriage season." And she's like, "At least you don't have to, Lucy, because you're engaged to Mr. Hasselby," which they've been engaged for a long time. It's been a business deal. So Lucy's like, "Okay, cool, whatever, I'll marry this guy." The next day, Kate kind of sends everybody out to go shopping and is like, "Gregory, you should go out shopping with Lucy. I saw you guys dancing together last night." And Gregory's like, "Actually, Lucy's not the one I want to marry. Hermione is." So Kate's like, "Fine, whatever." So she sends the three of them and Neville Burbrook. You remember Nigel Burbrook? This is his younger brother. So, and Neville Burbrook to town so they can all go shopping together. And they all decide to have a picnic together. Lucy, at one point, pulls Gregory away from Hermione and is like, "You're doing too much, man. Like, you're gonna overwhelm her. You're behaving like every other suitor. You need to take like a step back. You need to act more aloof because you're more likely to catch her attention that way." He does. And then later that night when they're all hanging out together and Lucy kind of like tries to slip away, Gregory follows her and is like, "Hey, your advice is not working. Now she's not paying any attention to me." And Lucy is like, "Yeah, sorry about that. I know. But Hermione can't marry the guy she's currently interested in, and you seem like the best option. So we're gonna do that." As she's like telling Gregory about kind of what Hermione was saying about Mr. Edmonds, Gregory, who's had 7 successful marriages in his family before him happen that he's basically gotten to witness, was like, that sounds familiar. Sounds like she's in love with him. I am going to back off. In this conversation, Gregory also gets like a really good look at Lucy, and he's like, "Actually, Lucy is very, very pretty. Like, in comparison to Hermione, she doesn't seem like it, but Lucy is very, very pretty." And Lucy is like, "I think you should still go after Hermione, though. I think that's the correct move. I think, because honestly, I like you better than any of the other suitors she's had." It's fine. Lucy, somehow in the night, makes herself like really sick with anxiety because she just wants things to work out for Hermione. She makes herself sick with anxiety and she opts to not go down to breakfast. Hermione goes down and is like, "I'll make you a plate." She runs into Gregory while they're like making a plate. So they eat together. And Hermione kind of finds out, like, "Hey, this guy's not so bad. I actually really, really enjoy him." And so she starts getting a little bit of a crush on Gregory. She's a little boy crazy. We love that for her. She brings the plate back up, and she's talking to Lucy, and she's like, "I don't know if I like Gregory or Mr. Edmonds better. Like, girl, you've been writing letters to Mr. Edmonds for months, and you talked to Gregory once, and now you can't decide." Okay. Lucy is like, "Mwahaha, my plan is working." But Lucy is hanging out at this big event at the Bridgerton house when her brother Richard shows up. He's like, "Hey, our Uncle Robert, wants you to come back to London because your marriage is actually happening sooner than you think. Like, our uncle wants to speak with you about that." Kate is like, "Aw, bummer. I really like Lucy, like to herself. She's like, I like Lucy and I think Gregory and Lucy should get together. Kate is like, why don't you stay for another 2 days? We're having a giant ball, and once we're done with that, you guys can go back to London. Because I want you to know this, because I also realized I didn't say this before. Lucy and Richard were raised by their uncle. So he's basically their like, guy. Their guardian. That's what the name is. Richard is like, hey, Lucy, like, our uncle wants to marry you off soon. Like, it's gonna happen very soon. And so Lucy is like,
Oh man.
it's kind of a bummer. I don't think I want to be married yet. So she kind of is like, oh man, and goes and sulks in the garden, and she's just like hanging out there thinking to herself, when Gregory comes to think in the garden, because he's thinking about Hermione. Because he thinks that Richard is in love with Hermione. And Lucy's like, no, I would know if my own brother was in love with my best friend. So they're like confessing things to each other, and they're like chatting and having a good time. And Gregory is like, I am a terrible shot. And Lucy is like, whatever. Hermione can't dance at all. That's why I danced with you that first night. And then she's like, also, I'm a great shot. Slay. Brag to him. So they walk back to the house together, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, I know that was your alone time. I'm sorry I took up your time. Like, we were joking together and stuff like that. I should have left you alone. And Gregory's like, you know what? I really didn't mind not having alone time. Like, I liked spending that time with you. So the masked ball arrives, and Kate is like, Gregory, how's everything going for you? Like, how's your courtship going for you? And Anthony is also like, hey, I want to know too. And Gregory's like, I'll tell you, Kate, but you can't tell Anthony because they're brothers and they're messing with each other. Love that for them. Love that for all of them. Gregory sees Lucy at the masked ball, and they're like, you know what? Let's have a little dance together, and then we can find Hermione afterwards. And they don't find her. Like, while they're dancing, they're looking around and they don't find her. So they're like, where? Lucy, who has been thinking about how Gregory thinks Richard and Hermione are in love, is kind of like, oh, I can't find Richard either. Maybe they're somewhere together. And Gregory is like, that's not good because they're definitely in love with each other. Like, Richard is definitely in love with her. Lucy's like, they aren't, but we should go find Kate and, like, figure out where they are. So, they go find Kate and they're like, hey, we can't find Richard or Hermione. And Kate's like, that's a shame because Richard is in love with Hermione. They find the two of them. They finally locate them. They're in the orangery, which...
Isn't that the most dumb mansion room you can think of, the orangery?
But they find them in the orangery, and they are hooking up with each other. So Kate is immediately like, you guys are getting married. They're like, we're engaged, yippee! Which, honestly, slay for Richard. Get the belle of the season. The jewel. The diamond. That's what it's called. The diamond of the season. Love that for you. Both Gregory and Lucy are very upset. Because Gregory thinks he was in love with Hermione, and Lucy is like, why didn't my brother tell me he was in love with my best friend? So they get very upset, and Gregory goes to drink it off. And so later, they run into each other in the hallway, and Gregory, like, drunkenly kisses her. And she's like, ooh, he's super cute, I'm gonna kiss back. He's also drunk, maybe he won't remember this. The next day, Lucy, Hermione, and Richard leave for London. Gregory comes to say goodbye to Lucy. Interesting. And ask her if he will see her in London. And she tells him, she's like, well, I'm now officially engaged to Hasselby. Like, originally it was kind of like, that's probably going to happen. Now it's like official. I'm officially engaged to Hasselby, so I don't think it's going to happen. 1 month later, yippee, Hermione and Richard have gotten married. And Lucy has to go talk with Hasselby and his father about, like, the whole getting married. She thinks his father is a pig, but she actually really doesn't mind, like, the young Hasselby. But in this time period, she's also like, I kind of really miss Gregory, my old pal Greg. Gregory returns to London after he spends an entire month with Kate and Anthony. Oh, to be rich. Oh, to vacation for a month. But he returns to London, finally, and he sees Lucy in the park. They go up and they talk to each other, and he's like, hey, my sister Daphne, the return of Daphne, again, is hosting a ball. You should come. And she's like, I don't know if I'll be allowed to, but I can try. And he's like, great, Violet will persuade Uncle Robert. Gregory goes to visit Violet, because he's not living with Violet right now. And Violet is like, of course I'll get Lucy invited. We love Lucy. Violet also, because she likes to read her children at like inappropriate times, and she's like, hey, Gregory, you don't need to impress your brothers. Like, I feel like you need to hear that. Gregory hears through the grapevine that Lucy is marrying Hasselby, and they're like talking to each other, and he's like, that's crazy because Hasselby is gay. They go to the ball, and Violet is like, Gregory, you should come to Lucy's wedding with me. And he's like, no, that kind of makes me sad. Like, I don't want my pal Lucy to marry him. He's gay. Lucy arrives to the ball. Yippee, she was able to come. And she looks very, very pretty. And he is immediately like, oh man, I'm definitely in love with Lucy. They dance together. He is trying to find a way to speak with her in private, probably to tell her that her fiance is gay. But he's trying to find a way to speak with her in private. So Hyacinth, our girl Hyacinth, makes her return. She is a married woman. Hyacinth St. Clair is like, I'll rip her dress. She rips Lucy's dress and they leave the room. And Gregory is like, hey, just so you know, Hasselby is gay. And she's like, why would you tell me that? You've literally ruined something that could have been a happy marriage if, like, it could have been a fine marriage. It wouldn't have been a love match, but like, we could have at least gotten to a point where we liked each other if you hadn't told me that. And she's also pissed off that he's told her that because she's like, I'm literally in love with you, Gregory. He, in return, is like, well, I'm in love with you too, so you should marry me instead. And she's like, I literally would love to. The next day, she's like, hey, Uncle Robert, I got a legitimate proposal. Like, not Hasselby. Like, I'd like to marry Gregory Bridgerton instead. And he's like, oh, yeah, no, you can't do that. I'm being blackmailed. Huh? You're being blackmailed? Yeah, that's where the plot kind of takes a crazy twist. Like, it's just a plain love story, and then all of a sudden they introduce blackmailing, and it just goes crazy from here. Apparently, according to Uncle Robert, Lucy and Richard's father sold secrets to the French, and another lord named Davenport knew about it. Robert had been paying him off for like a lot of years because of this. And Robert is like, you will literally bring ruin to the rest of the family if you don't marry Hasselby. Like, you're gonna ruin our lives. So Lucy's like, well, alright. And so she agrees to marry Hasselby. So Robert is like, you should also stay in the house. Like, you should stop seeing Gregory. And so Lucy is being kept away from Gregory. Gregory decides to break into the house. And so he breaks into the house and he's like, what is going on? Like, I proposed to you, you say yes, and then I haven't heard from you since. And Lucy is like, well, I'm marrying Hasselby. He proposed first, I'm gonna marry him. And then he's like, but I'm in love with you. And she's like, I know you're in love with me, and I'm in love with you. We should do the hanky-panky so I can remember that you were my first love. Like, okay. Okay, she'll lose her virginity to him, even though she's gonna go marry another guy. Alright, girl. I love that for you. So, they hanky-panky the night before her wedding. He is like, please marry me. And she was like, I will discuss it again with my family. And when I'm headed out to the carriage, I'll give you a hand signal, if you're standing nearby, to let you know that, like, you need to come get me. And he's like, cool, excellent. So, apparently, across the street is favorite brother Colin. He lives there with Penelope and all their kiddos. So he runs across the street and he's like, hey, Colin, here's the whole story. And he's like, I am going to hang out here and wait for her to come out, like get into her carriage and wait for her hand signal so I can go get her. While they're talking, they see the wedding carriage roll up. They look out the window. Lucy does not do the hand signal and just gets into the carriage and rides away. This is the point in the prologue where Gregory literally runs miles to this church and interrupts the wedding. And he's like, I am in love with you, Lucy. Like, don't marry this guy. I'm in love with you. And Lucy is like,
I'm not gonna marry you, Gregory.
Scandal! Scandal, scandal, scandal! Lord Davenport at some point makes some snide remark. The guy who's blackmailing Robert. And I want to say Lord Davenport is Hasselby's dad. I might be totally misunderstanding that. But, so, he starts fighting Lord Davenport and another man, and Hyacinth is like, Hyacinth literally is a guest at this wedding, and she, like, turns to Lucy and she's like,
I'll literally ruin your life.
I do not care. I will ruin your life. And Lucy goes through with her wedding to Hasselby anyway. Later, Gregory like finds her and he's like, why would you do that? Like, you accepted my proposal and you went and married some other guy. She basically doesn't say a whole lot to him, but she's like, I had to. Like, I had no other choice. And that's the point when he kind of figures out, like, oh, she needs his help. Like, she's in danger. Gregory goes to the reception, and which is being hosted at Uncle Robert's house. He goes to the reception and sneaks in through Lucy's window, and that's where he finds her. And then he figures out that Lucy is being blackmailed, and he's like, you guys still haven't consummated the marriage. The marriage can still be annulled, and we can still get married, and we can figure out this blackmailing thing. And she's like, I don't know, like, I don't think that would work. And he was like, okay, let me kidnap you. I'll kidnap you to get you out of here. He picks her up over his shoulder and takes her away, and then hides her in a water closet in the house. And gets her to tell him exactly, like, what's going on, what's the full story. So she does, and he's like, give me an hour, and I'll figure it out. He goes and meets with Hasselby, Hermione, and Richard, and breaks down the whole deal for them. Hasselby is like, that's excellent. Like, I don't want to trap her in a marriage she's not, like, ready for, so I'm gonna go convince my father for you. And Richard is like, this whole thing seems shady. Our dad was a very honorable man. Like, it's weird that he was the one selling secrets to the French. That doesn't seem right. Our uncle probably made that up. So Hasselby goes out to talk to his father to figure out, like, what's the exact details of this. And Gregory is like, Hermione, let me take you to Lucy so you can go, like, spend time with her. And they get up to the water closet, and Lucy isn't there anymore. Dun dun dun. So, apparently, Lucy's uncle, Uncle Robert, found her and led her to a room where he was like, you're gonna consummate the marriage whether you like it or not. Gregory bursts into the room, and then, surprise, surprise, Robert has got a gun to Lucy. What? He's holding her at gunpoint to be like, you are going to hanky-panky with this man, so help me God. And Gregory, this is when Gregory was like, wait a minute, you're the one being blackmailed to Uncle Robert, not your brother. And so, Robert almost shoots Lucy, but Gregory and Richard get to him first. And Richard is like, I will literally pay you, Uncle Robert, to leave the country and literally never come back. And I'll also report Davenport if you decide to snitch. So Lucy, who has now become decent friends with Hasselby, is like, hey, yo, can we get this marriage annulled? And of course Hasselby's like, yeah, I don't mind. We weren't a love match. I would rather you be with a love match. And so Lucy is essentially like, you know what? I will help you find a lavender marriage wife. So they get married. They live happily ever after. Additionally, they have 9 children. Huh? So anyway, apparently the entire epilogue is just about how fertile Lucy is. So if you haven't noticed, they've already been placed. These are the ones with the cute pink covers. Right there. It kind of suffers, the plot kind of suffers the same way that Hyacinth's plot suffers, where it's not, like, as interesting as some of these other plots, in my opinion. But it's very interesting because you can tell Julia Quinn very clearly listened to her readers when they gave her, like, advice or, like, noted things that they didn't like. Because actually, I really like Gregory and Lucy as a couple. The only downside is that he's definitely in love with someone else. Not that he can really control that, but it does put him a little bit lower than maybe these two. Yeah, I actually really, it's a popular thing among the fandom to be like, oh, On the Way to the Wedding is the worst one. I disagree with that. I think they're very weirded out by the idea that we first meet Gregory when he's like 11 years old, and now they're like, oh, Gregory's a rake now. He's an adult. This is my official ranking. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this video ends up being a little bit shorter than the first one. What did you guys think about these last 4 books? Do you have a particular favorite of all of your Bridgerton books? Does your ranking look like mine or look very different from mine? I am actually genuinely curious to know that. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, give it a like. If you want more from me, you want more unhinged recaps, go ahead and subscribe. Give me your recommendation for a series I should read and recap for you down below. Today, go read a smutty romance. Go outside and swim in a pool if you have one near you. And go visit your local library. I will see you all later. Goodbye!